and welcome back to another episode of Reading Rule, y'all. I am so excited that y'all are here with us because I am talking to the author of one of my absolute favorite Whippoorwill winners from this year, Phil Stamper, author of Golden Boys. He's a fellow Midwesterner, and we are going to have a great conversation today. I am so excited. Phil is from a rural village near Dayton, Ohio, so not too far from where I grew up, actually. And while it could be seen as a boring lifestyle to some, he kept himself entertained through playing the piano and writing stories that stretched his imagination. He has a BA in music from the University of Dayton and an MA in publishing with creative writing from Kingston University. When he first left his home state, he landed in Washington, D.C. with no job prospects, $800 in graduation money, and the promise of a walk-in closet to live in. Not long after, he's not totally sure how, he was jumping headfirst into a career in nonprofit PR and sleeping in a real bed. That's awesome.
That was
He
a big
loved
step for
writing.
me.
He loved writing for a living, even if he was writing press releases and news stories and hundreds of emails to annoyed journalists. But after a while, the dry writing started to get to him, so he thought he'd finally work on that book he always wanted to write. Years later, Phil is now the best-selling author of The Gravity of Us, As Far as You'll Take Me, and other queer books for kids and teens, including the one we're going to talk about today, which is Golden Boys. He works in author development for a major book publisher in New York City, where he lives with his husband and their dog. Welcome, Phil. Thanks so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Hi, so nice to be here virtually in the Midwest. I'm already getting big Midwest vibes, which is good. It's always comforting on a call. And yeah, it's so nice to chat about Golden Boys and especially like I've been, we'll talk about this in I'm sure our conversation, but the more books I write, the more kind of I get to reflect on my rural experience, and you could really I think tell that in my work, and so it's I feel like I've gotten even more of an appreciation for where I was raised, and for better or for worse, like and putting that into books has just been really wonderful for me, even though I currently live outside of New York, which is not particularly rural.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue into the first question that I ask everybody who's on, because it's my obsession and it's something that I'm constantly thinking about. So we already kind of said where you're from in name, a village outside of Dayton, Ohio, but can you talk to us a little bit about how that has impacted who you are as a person and also shaped who you are as a writer in a little more depth than what you just did?
Yeah, yeah. So I was raised in a village of 3,000, a few, I don't know, a few thousand people. It fluctuates. And it's kind of a small pass-through village where we have kind of one big road, and then the rest is farmlands. And I lived on the big road, so I had the main street lifestyle while everyone else had the farming lifestyle. But I still had such a like I don't know. Growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s in rural Ohio was just like such an experience that I like have a hard time putting it into words, but it was so like transformative to who I was as a person, because I think that I was born at such a strange time for rural people. And I'll explain that this doesn't make any sense right now, but I promise I will try to explain it. But when I was growing up, the internet just magically existed. And like I don't think people now understand just how huge that was. But how I existed as a queer person was really just like hiding myself. There was literally I didn't know a single person who was queer. My family could not know. I was in a very, very, very conservative area, and did not feel safe with kind of who I was. Spent a lot of time like really, really doubting myself, having a lot of that emotional baggage that still, I carry with me today. But the like kind of the shining light in all of that is I got to become a preteen and later a teenager who had access to the internet. And because of that, my rural small town world really opened up in a huge way. And I was like, oh, gay people exist. Like, I don't think people realize that like we knew they existed in that there I don't know, there were TV shows with gay characters on at that time, but only like one. and like there were, I don't know, there were some movies like Brokeback Mountain came out when I was in high school, so it's like, okay, great, wonderful representation for the gays of just dying. But still, I was able to like connect with real people on the internet who were queer, and that to me was like incredible because it opened up my world in such a big way, and I think led to my success as an adult. And for me, it was very much in my writing, especially my early writing, you could see that so much of what mattered to me as a teen was, how do I get out of here? How do I bust out? I'm going to do this. I'm going to live in New York. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to do, of course, we all have outlandish dreams. But I was like, no, but there's something there. There's some energy that I feel like I'm bringing to this, that I know everyone says they want to like get out of this, podunk town or whatever. But I was like, I really think I can do it. And I think that I'm going to be able to find myself along the way, as cheesy as that sounds. And I knew that I needed to, because I wasn't really safe where I was. Um, and so how it influenced my writing is, I really didn't get to reflect on, it was fight or flight for me, and I flew. And that was my growing up. And thank God I had access to the things that I did, so that I could kind of get out and find a community that was accepting. But in my writing, I get to kind of go back and reflect on that. And in so many of my books, my first couple ones are about being thrown into these bizarre kind of situations that are reminiscent of when I moved to DC with $800, had never been to a big city like DC, didn't know what it was about. And then just kind of moving on from there, all of my books got to focus on like what I loved about rural life, what I wish I could have experienced more and more fully as a queer person, but then also what I did really enjoy and love, like as any person does, growing up in a small town like that, and the things I appreciate, and like the Taylor Swift style, like I'm talking original Taylor Swift, like the tear chops on my guitar, kind of. I had a truck in the back, in the farm roads of Ohio. So like obviously I was an early Swiftie. But just that kind of feeling, and then kind of taking the cliches out of it and saying like, really, what does this mean to me, has informed kind of the last half of my writing career so far, with Golden Boys, my middle grade debut, Small Town Pride, all of them, and the sequel to Golden Boys, of course, Afterglow, is actually fully set in rural Ohio, which was so much fun for me, because I was like, I'm going to make these four gay boys as gay as possible, and they're going to just be loving life in their small town, even if some of them do want to, quote unquote, escape and some want to stay. So that's a really long way to say that, like, I can't imagine having any sort of writing career without the experiences that led up to it. And those experiences were so specifically rural to me. And so every time I go back to think of what life is like as a 16-year-old, as a 17-year-old, I can't really separate that from the 16-year-old that I was. Did that answer
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, that's perfect. And I just will take this opportunity to say that I love a long way to say things. So please
Welcome to
take the long
Ohio. Like,
way. Yeah, so you've hit on so many things that I am constantly thinking about in the work that I do with this podcast, with my website, with all of the things that I teach pre-service teachers in my classes, like all of the things, how to toe that line of like, there are problems in rural places, but there are also really great things about rural places too. And so how do we process that? Like, what does that look like? And, for me, it wasn't that I was unsafe in my rural place, but for me, it just felt like there wasn't room enough for me to stretch. Like
yeah,
that I wanted to be able to stretch in a way that I couldn't, or I felt like I couldn't necessarily. But also, I will say that I bought hook, line, and sinker into the idea that there is no way that you could be successful unless you lived someplace outside of a rural town, right? Like that idea of like that success and to be somebody you couldn't be in a town of 800
oh,
people, which
absolutely.
is where I
Like
grew up.
that's literally true. Like now, I think it's less. I mean, it's actually more possible because TikTok and YouTube, and like you can actually be the kind of, like, you could reach so many people from such a small area. But I don't know, when we were younger, that was not the case. It was like you just tried to get out if you wanted to, or you just stayed, and kind of that, if that was your thing too, great.
Right. Except for I feel like I was very judgmental of the people who stayed. I feel like a lot of people were
Oh, of
judgmental of the
course.
people who stayed, because it's like, don't you want to be better? There was like this idea that like if you stayed, you were somehow lesser than. I mean,
Yeah.
even though my parents still farm the land that I grew up on, like I was one of those kids. I was out on a farm and not like on the main road, and I was always jealous of the people who were on the main road because they like, their friends were closer than a quarter mile down the road.
That is true. Yeah.
Um, but I didn't think lesser of them necessarily, but for some reason, like the people who were graduating with me, like even if they went to Ball State, which was like, 20, 30 minutes away, that was still seen to me as some sort of failure. And I'm still working through like why that is and what that means, and then like also what that means for representation inside of rural young adult literature, which I'm working very hard to make like a genre, a
Yeah.
thing that people recognize, including publishers, because it needs to
Yes.
happen, because rural kids deserve to be able to walk into a library or a bookstore and go to a rural section and find mirrors for themselves that like
Exactly.
reflect their own like contemporary living situations and experiences. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, so I think what you're talking about and how growing up in a rural area impacted you, it connects a lot to my own experiences too, even though I didn't have that layer of queerness.
Mhm.
But I think that there was something that felt stifling. There was something that felt like, I don't know, this isn't it for me. And in order to be somebody, I got to leave. And now I've worked, I've worked like for decades to try to get back. Um, and so I think that, and I write a lot about that too, out migrants and what it means to still, identify as rural, even if you don't live in a rural place anymore. Um, which is one of the reasons why I love this book so much. That's one of the reasons why I love Golden Boys so much. And I think the entire committee was really appreciative of it because it challenged us to think about how we define what a rural book is. Because most of the literature that we review is set in rural places. And so when we were having conversations about Golden Boys, it was like, well, does this meet our criteria? Because all of the boys are outside of a rural space.
Yeah.
And so my argument was, yeah, but like rural books are about rural people, and all of these boys are still rural people.
Exactly.
They're just not inside of a rural place. And that's why I work with rural out migrants a lot too, because there's not a lot of space carved out in scholarship or otherwise for those folks and folks like me, to try to work through and understand like who we are, because we're still rural, but we're not living in a rural place anymore. So does that really mean that we're still rural? Or,
Yeah,
like how do
exactly.
we identify and how do we define the identity? So we were all really grateful for Golden Boys. So thank you for writing it and for how it challenges us to think about like, what does it mean to be rural and what does it mean to be rural outside of a rural place?
Yeah, the thing with Golden Boys and more importantly the series, and I like to, I know that this word is specifically for Golden Boys, but it was really important that I think of this book as a series because I had that same struggle of, is this a rural book? Like, it's not. It's set in Paris, it's set in DC, it's set, it has these like city settings, but I was like, but these are rural boys, and they, it starts out in Ohio, it ends in Ohio. No spoilers there. That's just kind of, that's what happens with summer breaks.
Right.
They end
You
and you
always
go
come
back to
back.
school.
Yeah.
And then the second book of the series is actually fully set in rural Ohio. And so I always had to like zoom out and think of the whole series when I'm thinking, is this a rural book? Like, yes, absolutely. And then it took me a little bit longer to think like, oh, right, like these are still rural boys. Like everything they do is informed by their experiences. And I think this shows, especially when you get into the sequel, it shows their experiences coming back because some of them, try not to spoil things, but some of the boys are not going to leave Ohio at the end of the series. Some of the boys are absolutely going to leave Ohio, and they've always wanted to. And none of them are really judgmental about whether you go or you don't. And all of them are kind of equally viewed as like, you are where you came from, like this is your experience, like you're doing what's right for you. And they kind of got to subvert the expectation that, to be a successful queer person you have to leave your small town, which was really what I wanted to focus on. It was like kind of an unexpected fun thing about the book was I was like, oh, but what if he doesn't like insert city here? Or like, what if he likes insert city here, but he actually feels like he could make more of an impact at home? And so that was fun for me because I don't think a lot of books do that. And I'm never one that's going to be like, my book was the first book to do X, because as soon as you say that, 800 people are going to be like, well, actually, this really well known book did the exact same thing. You actually copied. Um, but I do think that there are fewer books that kind of tackle it in this more nuanced way. And I'm sure there are plenty of rural people who would, see that I've lived in DC, London, and New York, and only come back twice a year to visit, and they'd be like, well, this is not actually a rural author, and like absolutely valid to say that. But I think that every single one of my experiences day to day is also informed by the fact that I was raised in the community that I was raised in. Like I can't escape it, even if I thought I was like escaping to DC or whatever that experience was. And I think that's kind of a fun that's a fun conversation to have. I mean, it's could be potentially dicey, but it's a fun conversation to have because it's like I've always been like, well, where's my true home? But it's kind of all maybe it is Ohio and DC and New York and wherever I decided to go.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I, for me in particular, your book Golden Boys was so important and also just really exciting, because there aren't very many books that do that. I mean, there's typically movement of some kind across places, like either someone in migrates or someone, like there's always, or like the main character is going to stay with their grandparents on their ranch for the
Oh
summer
yeah.
or whatever, you know what I
Or
mean?
yeah,
Like there's
the like city person comes in
right,
and
right,
gets
yeah, so
to
there's like an
crash course on
in-migrant.
rural experience. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that movement, like, one of the other stories too that won Angel Falls, I'm really excited to talk to the authors of that book, because there's this concept that comes up for them of like, even if you're not from the place, you're still from the people. So
Yeah,
like
that's a good way
technically
to.
this one of the characters is an immigrant because she was growing up in New York City, but she comes back with her dad who grew up in this town, and like her whole family is from this town, and so she's not really 100% an outsider because she's still from the people who were from the place, but she also isn't technically from
Right.
the place. And so like kind of pulling at the threads of the nuances that exist within identities, especially as they're connected to place, I think is really important. And I just wrote an academic piece with a friend about narratives of leaving, narratives of staying, and narratives of returning, as they exist in rural YA literature, because I'm an out migrant, she's an in-migrant, and she grew up in suburbia in Minnesota, and now she lives in Appalachia. And I have family from Appalachia and grew up in rural Indiana. And so like how we interact with and understand these sort of dominant narratives that we were talking about a little bit earlier, that to leave, you have to leave in order to be somebody, you have to leave in order to be
Mhm.
successful. If you stay, you're some kind of loser. And then people always say, well, you can always come back. But like, that's not true either, because sometimes there's not a job that exists in the economy of the town for you.
Right. Well,
And
it's
it,
especially true. Sorry, it's especially true in the like the Rust Belt in the Midwest. Like you go where the jobs exist more often than not. And I'm just thinking about how like my both sets of my grandparents like came from Appalachia up to like I'm sure they had their own journey of like, well, got back from the war, now we're going to move to Ohio because like that's where the industrial jobs are and that's the factory that we're going to work at. And maybe to them it was also we got out, or like maybe we wouldn't be welcomed back in Kentucky because the rest of their family was there. And so it's interesting because like a lot of people, if you ask any New Yorker on the streets, like they'd be like, "Oh, Kentucky and Ohio are the same, right?" Like, or like, "Oh, they're so close," but it's like, no, actually, like different, like really different experiences there, and like to my grandparents in the 1930s, 40s, like that probably was a huge move for them, and so it's kind of interesting to think about the many different dynamics in moving and what it even means across generations too. Sorry, I took it in
yeah,
a totally different direction, but like
no,
it's
it's fine.
totally fascinating.
And I think so, like, and a lot of times people don't think about time as an aspect of place, but it totally is.
Mhm.
And so I think like my grandparents did the same thing. They were from East Tennessee. And I've said it on this podcast before, so sorry to those of you who are listening who have already heard this story a million times. But my great uncle Leroy, I asked him one time why they came up here, and he said, well, because we was starving down there. Um, and so they came up and they ended up working for another farmer in Tipton County, and they then ended up in the factories, and like all of my aunts and uncles pretty much worked in a steel parts factory, a tool and die place in Tipton, Indiana, that is now closing. And so some of my cousins don't really know what they're going to do, but my aunts and uncles are old enough to retire.
That's
And
good.
so that at least worked out kind of for them.
Yeah.
But I'm the first person in my dad's family to graduate from college, let alone graduate with an advanced degree. And my great grandpas, my great grandfathers, couldn't really even read or write.
Mhm.
And so that's a pretty, I mean, from
Yeah.
not being able to read or write to Shay has a PhD in literacy.
I
I
think
mean,
that's
that's a pretty,
fast. Like
you know.
that is quick generationally to like have that kind of jump. And
And
it's
I
so
think
funny
that's
because
proof that
we have the
how
same.
hard they worked,
Yeah.
to
Oh,
provide
exactly.
a world where that could be possible for me.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, like I totally relate to what you're saying. But I think the leaving and returning aspect in the series feels really important to
Mhm.
me too, as a reader and as a person who has that identity, because um, I went to Purdue University after I graduated from Westel, and when I was looking for jobs, for teaching jobs, I was like, I want to teach in a rural school because that's all I knew.
Yeah.
I went to a rural school, like I had no
Yeah.
idea how to exist in a city. I mean, my first semester at Purdue, I lived in a dorm that held the same amount of people as my entire town, you know? And so it was just like, like, how do I exist in this place? And I've experienced varying degrees of that everywhere else I've lived. um, but anyway, so I came back to this rural town and I thought that I would just like fit right in. And in some ways I did, because I understood when a kid was like, I'm sorry, Miss P, we were kidding in the morning, one of my goats was having problems,
Mm.
my stuff isn't done, I'm sorry. Or I was mucking stalls, or I got up early to milk, or it's harvest time and I was helping get the combine ready, or whatever. Like I understood that those
Yeah.
were
You knew the
valid.
language. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like.
like I understood that those were valid experiences to be having, and I was
Mhm.
more probably I don't know, like what's the word that I'm looking for? I gave grace
Yeah.
and, extensions to those kids for homework and whatever, because I understood what they were going through. Whereas like someone who didn't grow up with those experiences might be like, well, so what?
Yeah.
Like, so what? Turn it in. And so in that way I fit in a little bit, but there were other ways in terms of like, I mean, I was always kind of a black sheep in my own family anyway, because I was definitely always more to the left of of where most of the rest of my family was. And that's still true to this day, which takes some like, tricky navigation. But I think, you know, I felt out of place in a lot of different ways, even in a rural place, because I'd gone away, and those ideas that I had already started to formulate in terms of social equity had found, purchase, and had found someone to stoke that fire, um, and help me refine the way that I was thinking about things in a way that then sort of made me a little out of place
Mhm.
in my rural school. But then when I went to a PhD program that was like in Austin, Texas, I felt out of place because of the city, but I felt welcome because of the ideologies that existed there. And so I think place is a lot more complicated than what people realize. And I think that your books help us understand that better. You sort of already talked about this a little bit, that
Mhm.
when you wrote this book, and probably when you wrote Small Town Pride, maybe all of your books, you thought of them as rural books. Um, how or why do you think that is important to your process, and also to like the way that you build the story?
Yeah. I think it differs. book to book. My first book, The Gravity of Us, was not a rural story. It starts out in Brooklyn, and then they move to Texas, and the main character is just distraught that he is being torn out of Brooklyn, because he had his whole future planned out for himself. He's a city kid. He's spoiled. He's annoying. I love it. So it's a little different experience. I guess I was just like cosplaying that day as a as a real New Yorker. But with my second book, that As Far as You'll Take Me, follows a rural Kentucky kid who graduates high school early and moves to London to pursue his dream of being a musician. And so it's a big found family narrative of like he didn't have the support at home, so he literally goes across the world to try and find it, and ultimately like finds heartbreak, finds all these not great things, but also finds his like kind of found family there and finds a place where he belongs. And that was my first foray into like touching on rural issues that I had, because found family is not a rural issue specifically. It's obviously a very prevalent issue in the queer community, and like we're all kind of searching for that. I think I feel searching for that sometimes, and I'm like, we moved to the suburbs, and I don't see another gay person walking a stroller. Maybe I should go find one. So you're kind of like you're always searching for that, you know, people who are like you or like have the similar experiences to you that you could just relate to and feel a little bit less alone. And I really leaned into that with As Far as You'll Take Me because, I don't think I would call that a rural book because it's set in London. But to me, it kind of is because Marty, the main character Marty's worldview was so shaped by his experience in his small religious hometown. And he really just had to kind of break free of everything, some good, some bad, when he moved to London. And I think that opened the door for me for some of my other books. Golden Boys was the third published book that I wrote. I wrote some trunk novels that will never see the light of day, but Golden Boys is the third, we'll just say real physical book now that I had written. And that one I got to do a lot of fun because I was like, okay, I started in this like world, but like, what if there was a little bit less internal shame and resentment and a little bit more kind of queer ambition and focusing on that? Like, what got me out of Ohio was kind of what I wanted to focus on. And then as I started writing, it really was, oh, but like some of these characters, like don't need to leave, like, or they think they want to leave, but like this isn't what they planned. So like how can I play around with that? And then Small Town Pride, it was that I wrote next, and that was even further like, oh, we're going full rural. I'm writing every single experience that I loved about Ohio and I'm putting it into a book, and I'm making the mom a janitor because my mom was a janitor at my high school, and like it's just all these things where I was like, no, it's going to be like cosplaying my own life, or like kind of rewriting my own life as if it was in a little bit more of a there were more like pockets of acceptance in my hometown growing up, which obviously was not the case when I was a teen, but maybe now there would be enough to start a pride festival. Who knows? And then yeah, it's become just such a key part of the things I write, and I know it's because it's like who I am specifically, but it's very cliche to say write what you know, but I feel so comfortable writing what I know, which are these experiences. And I don't think, like I said before, I don't think a lot of other authors are doing that, because how can they if they haven't had this specific experience? But I will say that a lot of the books that I write, I get so many really, really kind messages from teens you know, who are like Marty, who escaped to London, except for they haven't gotten a chance to escape yet. And they're like, we have it, where I'm ready. I'm going to like wherever. I'm going to school in where I don't know, California, and that's their London. But they're like,
Mm-hmm.
I just identified so much with this experience. And I think that has really urged me to keep pushing forward into these like rural experiences, rural stories, because they're just so important to me. Because this is stuff I've struggled with since I was literally, a child. Like, I knew I was gay when I was 6 years old. So like that is hard when the first person I told, I was 18, I think, or 17 or 18, but like I was a senior in high school. So that's a long amount of time to really build up some nice resentment. And so I want to kind of deconstruct that and be like, well, what does that look like now? How could we avoid that? What would be on the shelves that I would have grabbed and like felt a little bit seen in? And so I know how special those kind of stories are. And that's, I think, why kind of I keep gravitating to them. That's how they've influenced me, is because I can feel it. Like I hear it from the students, from the adults, even the 35-year-olds who are just like me, who may not have had these books when they were growing up, but they're like, thank God they exist now. I'm going to give it to every queer person I know. And I'm like, yes, do it, please, please. Like they're so necessary. And so it's completely changed who I am as a writer. And I think it's because I discovered like what I like, the kind of the rural heart of my stories. If I had to like kind of pick something that kind of rose up from that.
Yeah, and I wish that I would have had things. I loved small town pride as well. And I wish I would have had knowledge of and this is one of the reasons why I do what I do, because as a rural teacher in a rural school, I mean, we had maybe 450 students, K through 12, like
Yeah,
small.
that's small.
Or maybe 457 through 12. I don't know. But it was like graduating classes were like 50, which was about what
Yeah,
mine
mine was
was.
69.
Yeah, mine was
So
50.
pretty
Um,
small.
yeah, so there were some students who were out. And in general, I mean, I I didn't see much in the hallways. Um, every once in a while I would hear things and I would have to be like, listen, we're not doing that in here. Um, and we would have conversations in my classrooms during like op-eds and stuff where people would want to write stuff about, same-sex marriage and bring the Bible into it and whatever.
Of course.
And so we would have conversations and I felt like um I don't know. I felt like I was doing okay, that I was doing something at least to make, folks feel comfortable, to know that I loved them no matter what. It didn't matter to me. I thought who they were was great. And but when I look at my syllabi and when I think back to what I taught, I didn't provide opportunities for students to interact with books like this. And this was like, 2010.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's
no,
not
that's
like I think there are more coming out now than what existed when I was teaching. But the number of students who came out like on Facebook after they graduated was staggering. Um, and the response that they got from their parents and from members of the community was mixed. And so like I understood why they waited, but at the same time it just like hurt my heart that they felt like they had to. And so like part of the reason why I'm doing this is so that hopefully rural teachers like
yeah,
me who would like to include stories of layered rural identities, of intersectional rural identities, can give their students, queer or no, opportunities to read about queer experiences in rural places, because queer people have always existed in rural places and they will always
exactly.
continue to exist in rural places. And
Yeah, and
so
my husband and I talk about this a lot because we both have the same experience of having friends in high school who it would have been really great if they had like either figured it out sooner or told me sooner. Just because I was like, wow, we could have been going through this together. Like,
mm,
it's so like you were going through the same awful like brain thoughts at the same time that I was, and like, wow, it would have been so great if we could have just like said, wow, this is crappy, huh? Like just anything to make you feel a little bit less alone.
yeah,
And I think about that all the time because, of course, that did happen at my high school too. And not a ton. And honestly, I like kind of like hid myself from a lot of what happened there. But yeah, and it's always heartbreaking when it's like, oh, this could have been really healing for me as a kid who was struggling. But at the same time, it's like, well, I don't blame them. God, like I was raised in the same town. Like I know who their parents are. I know why you chose to do this. Or maybe why you like were in denial, or maybe you didn't realize it yet. Like it's totally understandable because like again, this is only up until we're 18, which is so young. Like, and I'm realizing now like just how young it is. So like that's why I also never like in none of my books are you going to feel like encouraged to come out in a way that might be unsafe, because that's a huge thing. Because I'm like, protect yourself. That's what I did. And there are probably friends that were like, oh, I wish Phil would have come out earlier. And I'm like, nope, I knew that it would not have been a good time for me. And it still wasn't, but at least I was 18. It could handle things a little bit more then. And so, I mean, you got to stay safe. But at the same time, it's like opening the doors like this to like comfortable conversations, or just knowing that there are allies in the room with you. You don't even need to like have other queer people like be near you. If you know that somebody's going to be fighting your battle for you, or somebody's going to be saying like, don't say that word, or some anything like that is just,
Mhm.
that's so much. And I think these books really open that door, yeah, in a way that just conversations can't. Like there's so much more, I guess, to a novel and spending time with it, that if you could share that with someone, it would be hugely impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. And thinking about that and thinking about sort of like affinity groups and like finding your people, makes me think of Small Town Pride and how the internet played into that story, and how he had, a forum that, he was involved in. And I've been thinking about this a lot, like, rural digital spaces.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of rural people don't have good access to digital spaces because
Mhm.
of their access to broadband or their inability to access broadband. But and that's another reason why I do what I do, because I'm hoping that, especially literacy in place, functions as a community, a rural community online, where students, readers, teachers, parents, whoever, can be part of the community and can engage in conversation about topics like this, and maybe just read and learn a little
Yeah.
bit, you know, and have critical thoughts, about thoughts that they've had,
Mhm.
so I think that your books and the ways that they, think about space and place, whether physical or digital, and how to be safe and how to find safety
Yeah.
in, other people, and still be brave in unsafe spaces. Um,
And I hope I was able to like kind of show that within the friend group as well,
yeah.
in Golden Boys, because they're four best friends who have been pretty open about their queerness since I would say like middle school-ish, like kind of figured it out at their own rates, but still like they were together, they were best friends. And like a lot of people will look at that and be like, okay, is that realistic in Ohio? And it's like, well, the gay people are there. Maybe it's not realistic that this like specific friend group is also like traveling everywhere, like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants style. But like, what is it really realistic? Like Sister of the Traveling Pants is magic pants. Like we'll
It's
just
a
like let that go.
story.
It's a story. But I think that having that community, having that friendship, like that's not outlandish. And even if your friends are just people you've met on Instagram that are in this like LGBTQ group that you like or something like that, that doesn't make it any less so. And I've made so many queer friends from just being an author, that a lot of the interstitial chapters within the Golden Boy series, are actually text threads with a group chat with all four
I
boys on a
love
group
this.
chat, which is like such a fun way to keep them all present in the same space while they're, gallivanting around London, or sorry, Paris, or wherever else they're at. Um, and I feel like that kind of, it's a mix of online community, but also found family that I was able to put in there and be like, this is achievable. Even if you're sitting there and you're like, well, I'm not going to come out, it's not safe for me to come out, you can read this book and be like, but one day I'll have a friend group like this, or one day like I can at least strive for this queer inclusive group. Maybe I can find it online now. Maybe I could start a Tumblr account and like get my niche fandom, like queer people like all on board. And it's like it's not that outlandish when you think about it. And that was kind of what I wanted to do, was to put something so bizarre and outlandish for gay people in the same town, but actually like say like, no, it's like pretty normal. Everything else about their lives is outlandish, but like this is like their family, and like that's a really cool experience to read about, especially in rural environments. Not saying that you don't have the same problems as a city kid or anything, but that I think it's more, you're even more closely connected, I think, to your close friends.
and you're more visible. I
Yeah.
think that's another thing, like, um, I talk a lot about how, like, Shay Kira said this thing one time. She said, bigotry doesn't have a zip code, or hate doesn't have a zip code, right? And so, like, a lot of these problems we think are like super big
Yeah,
problems for rural places are also big problems for city spaces, but
exactly.
we don't think about it that way, and we don't talk about that way because of the way that we tell stories about what it means to be urban, and what it looks like to be urban, and what it means to be rural, and what it looks like to be rural. Um, but I think another thing that I really appreciated about the characters in Golden Boys is that they express their queer identities in different ways. Some are more, they're just different. They're just different, and I think that that's really beautiful. And I also really appreciated the sort of social class dynamics,
Mhm.
especially between a couple of the characters, and how even though they all went different places, there's one character who went a place that, like, he didn't really want to go, and
Yeah.
like he wasn't studying in school, he was like
He
working
was
in
the
an
yeah, he was
arcade.
absolutely the odd
you
guy
know,
out, and tried not to be resentful for that. This is our dear Heath, in the
yeah,
book, who goes to Daytona Beach, but has a wonderful time
right.
with
Um,
reconnecting with family. And so it's like I still wanted those experiences to be really, I don't know, well-rounded, like fun experience. It should be a formative but like life-changing experience, even if it's not like you're getting into this huge internship program or like something that you think is going to literally change the world. Like you can still have a transformative summer. um, and like he approached it always with like a really open heart and an open mind. And I think that that's when he was able to like, connect with his family for the first time ever. And so like that, you kind of get the opportunity to like explore different dynamics when you do have like different, yeah, different kind of classes, unfortunately, in the same friend group, but like that doesn't, and they have the hard conversations about it too,
right,
especially in Afterglow. It gets a little bit more obvious because Heath is trying to go to university, and needs an athletic scholarship. He cannot go without it, and it's very
right.
clear. It's like he can't even. He was like, I don't even think I could get approved for a loan even if my dad co-signs. So like I only have one shot at this, and those are struggles that some of the other boys don't share.
Right.
And so that was there are just so many different types of queer people and so many different types of rural people that people ask me all the time. It's like, how did you find a way to like make these four boys so distinct? And of course, some people would say like, oh, every character sounded the same. Well, whatever your experience reading the book was, I tried to make them all different. And the way I did is just like there are just a lot of different types of queer people. So it wasn't actually that hard. And the fun thing about two books is I actually got to make some of their arcs a little bit
Mm.
more distinct. I guess this isn't a spoiler, but like Reese, who is in school for fashion design in Paris, is like has the cool Parisian storyline, isn't really sure what he wants to do still when he comes back. And in Afterglow, he decides to pursue drag because it's a mix of all the like wonderful things he loves, which is like art, fashion, music, performance, everything. And he becomes a little bit more effeminate, more out, more proud as he's doing his, kind of, even though at early stages it's secret drag kind of. Um, you change even month to month in your sexuality, in your expression, and I wanted to show that. So that's also kind of the fun part of a longer timeline is like people get to change too, and you get to see how they're changing just in the span of a year.
Yeah. And we are all always becoming, like
Yeah,
no one is ever finished. And I think that that's one of the most beautiful and also one of the most difficult things about humanity.
yeah,
Um, but I think what I really appreciated about especially the Heath Reese storyline and relationship is that, especially Heath's comments about Reese and his money and his family, and he's always, feels a little bit like he's on the outside looking in. And I think that, even in books that serve as windows, we always look for things that are relatable to us. And that's one of the things that was really relatable to me because I grew up a working class kid. And so I was always like, if I went over to a friend's house, it was always like wow, look at how big this house is and look at how nice
My
all of these
God.
things are. And
Exactly. I would be texting my friend in the bathroom, like, this guy is rich, or like whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's just because it's like they had a house. Like it's
Right, right, right.
not that dramatic.
And there were just certain like subdivisions out,
Yeah.
as sort of away from the farm and all of the farmhouses and farmland. And it was just like, they've got like brick facades and they've got brick around their mailbox. And, it's just
Yeah.
like imagining what the inside of that house looked like and how nice that, I really related to Heath in those ways. And so I think that that's really great. Like having four characters that really all share the spotlight and being able to show their multiple and layered identities in ways, it just opens up more space for more people to be
Right.
able to like relate to and identify and also learn from, right, the people who are sort of like them in some ways and then the people who are not like them. And I think that's one of the best things about reading, right? Like that's one of the
Exactly.
best things about writing stories and reading stories is that we can learn in those ways. So I'll just ask the last question that I try to ask of everyone, which is what would you say, what advice do you have for young people and or teachers who want to pursue writing as a hobby, as a side hustle, as a career?
Yeah. Yeah. I I've been asked this question a lot over the last
I'm
many,
sure.
many years.
Sorry.
And no, and this isn't a bad thing, but there are a few questions that always kind of stick around and you get asked a lot. And this is one of the few that I don't think has changed at all. Like I give the same answer every time and I don't care. You could listen to other podcasts, it's going to be very similar too. But I think that the experience of being a writer, if you decide you want to do it, even like a side hustle career, whatever it is, in a way that makes money, if that's your goal, it takes a lot of work and a lot of rejection. And specifically, I would say like the biggest thing that you can do is learn how to get feedback on your work in a way that doesn't personally hurt you. I wish I had done. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how. I don't. This is awful advice, but I don't know how you do it. I think really the only way I did it was just I kept getting a lot of beta readers, critique partners, friends who would just look at my book and tell me what they liked, what they didn't like, and I would really ask for the what don't you like though? Like what doesn't make sense? Give me something I'm not going to be upset, even though if I was going to actually be upset secretly, I would say I wasn't going to be upset because when you get, I mean, I got 90 some rejections from agents over between three different books over the course of I think like 4 years or so, 5 years probably, five, I don't know, a long time. Um, and those were all obviously very, very hard. And I ultimately it was, I ended up with an agent who I later had to drop and then signed with a different agent. So even this like, dream, like I finally, after 92 rejections, I had my agent. It wasn't even the right agent for me. And then I did find the right agent for me. So it was a really long process. And then on top of that, when you think you're like, well, I have an agent, so like, the days are coming, I'm about to be rich and famous. I got 85 rejections between two books, between both my agents, actually. But yeah, 85 different rejections from editors and publishers. And that was over the course of a couple of years as well. And those are really, really defeating because you are only one yes from a book deal, which means like your
Mhm.
book will be on shelves. And so being a writer, especially if you're trying to do it for publication, which I would always suggest if that's your plan, like keep it as your plan and like go for it. But the hardest thing is like you will be sharing something that's really personal and private to you to the world. That is very scary. But even before it gets to the world, you also have to please so many people in very big positions at different publishing companies, and they aren't always like super kind with their rejections. And so it's just you have to figure out a way to make sure that their no's are not going to hurt your mental health directly. And if it starts to, you need to learn that like you can take a break and pull back and be like, hey, I think I might just write something else for a little bit just to refill the well. Really focusing on your mental health and like protecting yourself during this time is incredibly important because rejections are just awful. And you get rejections for anything. Like you can't apply for a job without getting six rejections. It's a part of life. So it's something you should work on. Anyone should work on, but it's something that I wish I had like mentally trained for a little bit in advance, because I went through a really like kind of rough time with all of these no's. And I was just kind of hanging on thinking, oh, one yes will make it all better. And then shock, it goes on Goodreads. And, then you got people who are like, this is the worst thing I've ever read. And then it's like, oh, that's a different kind of rejection. So you really have to like, you got to get a thick skin, but you also have to know how to push through the nose and really like focus on your vision. What are you creating? Why are you creating it? And stick with the goal, as long as it makes sense to you and your kind of path.
I think that's really great advice. Thank you so much. I know
Yeah,
you need to run. So I just want to say again, congratulations on winning the Whippoorwill. We really love the book. And
thank you.
thank you so much for being here. And I have really loved chatting all things rural with you.
Yes, thank you. It was so nice chatting with you.